Alright, we've got a late one today. Late one. Oh, just drive past. Yeah. No, this isn't a private zone for me to record my things. God. Oh, someone's speeding over there. Wow, look at them go. Right. Jesus. In response, open bracket, maybe, close bracket, to da-di-da, or da-di-da, or da-di-da. I refute the idea that we are too attached to logic and reason as a result of our devotion to language. Ultimately, whatever is most desirable would be logical, as this is what logic ultimately sets out to achieve, or at least that is what I think it should be, if it isn't. However, we are not intelligent enough creatures to conduct perfect logic, and we attempt to improve our logical powers by combining our individual reasoning through language. However, this too can fail us sometimes, and even the language used to communicate with ourselves, including thoughts which don't necessarily take the form of words, can fail to fully grasp concepts to reach the genuinely logical conclusion. To put it simply, logic pervades, but is greater than language. Logic exists outside of language, but language is all we have available to us in order for us to traverse the dimensions of logic and reason. Okay, so chatting a load of shit. Great. My feelings towards the use of caffeine remind me of those I always tend to develop at a certain point when taking up a sport or activity like chess. I hate the point at which I realise it is not just a matter of grafting your way to learning something via your own processes, but instead there are techniques and secrets which can be learned that give you an immediate advantage over anyone who doesn't know them, even if it is quite literally a one-line instruction in chess. Even if it is quite literally a one-line instruction. End of sentence. In chess, this is why I hate the idea of opening theory. The person who memorises the most openings to the greatest length gives him or herself a huge advantage. And yes, this of course is just another part of the game now, but it feels almost like cheating for some reason. As for coffee and nootropics, if that's even the right word, or whatever they're called, similar feelings emerge. My instinct wants me to believe that there must be some downside to taking them. If there aren't any, and you really are smarter for e.g. drinking coffee every day, then it becomes a matter of who works out which method for taking it is best, and at what time, and at what dose, and how this differs for each person. And of course, then I realise that in my dream scenario, where they don't improve cognition, a similar problem arises, but at the genetic level. Some people are just born smarter. However, I am less aggravated by this, as it's a one-off thing for the most part, and you kind of don't have to actively do anything. It's a passive thing rather than an active thing. Actually, maybe that makes it even worse. Basically, I'm pissed off in all cases. Again, trying to think about what I'd be happy doing, I found myself returning to the idea that I want to create something that hasn't been done before. I suppose I'd be quite happy to be Dan Harmon or Justin Roiland and have created Rick and Morty, but I always hit the wall of knowing that it's already been done now. And whatever I did that would probably feel to someone else as if it was inspired by Rick and Morty, would instead feel to me as though it was tainted by it, and that it was the blood on my hands revealing me to be a murderer. It's not as if I don't realise that they too will have been inspired by many shows and all feats of artistic endeavour. And all feats of artistic endeavour do nothing but draw inspiration from the artist's own interests and what they watched when they were at my point. Okay, that's a really confusing sentence, but all artists draw inspiration from the things they were inspired by. Hence they were inspired by it. Anyway, but I can't shake that feeling. Almost everything I'd want my show to do has been done, not to mention even if I did decide to pursue this desire to create a show or something I'd be proud of, there would always come a time where money would be a necessity, and I just can't think of anything I'd be willing to do for something I don't value that much. Maybe my now long-lived desire for death really is quite simple. It seems rather humbling if it is as pathetic as it might be. What if it all stemmed from me reaching the point in my life where I am trying to figure out what I want to do with my existence, a point at which everyone must go through sometime. And unfortunately this point happened to unserendipitously coincide with the time at which regular adult responsibilities start to fall upon me, namely the need to earn money. I suppose if this is the case, I was just one of the unfortunate ones for whom the point came too late in life, if it ever comes at all. The only way I see around this issue is for there to be a system in place that funds people who find themselves in this limbo. Universal basic income would be nice. However, we cannot hope for things as utopic as this, and we can't even feed the starving and impoverished. Also, my scenario isn't, and hasn't been for a long time, as described above. Even with infinite funds, I believe that life still isn't worth living. The need for the ability to feel good, whatever that means to you, is essential, and precedes all previously mentioned. I found myself with a comfortable bed of wealth for now, and I suppose even that acknowledgement of its even that acknowledgement of its finite nature opens me up to arguments that I am in fear of when it runs out, and that might in fact be the cause of my inability to feel that the way I want to. But once more, I do not feel this to be so. Great sentences, Ollie. Yet another thing I quote unquote fear is deriving my sense of purpose, of happiness / contentment from extrinsic forces / factors / actors, which are ultimately outside of my control. Thinking back to Shirtgate or whichever year that happened, the guy who wore that shirt with semi-nude women on it that sparked huge controversy. My main issue with the whole sheding was the fact that so many people are so vulnerable to huge blows to their positive experience of existence that one individual on the other side of the planet that they haven't ever and never will meet can entirely ruin it. This is something I try to quash whenever I can. I hate makeup on a conceptual level. Oh god. on a conceptual level. But even things like working out to attain my dream physique. Leaving aside the obvious case of body dysmorphia that I believe everyone who works out will eventually develop, I probably moved the goalposts without knowing it every week I worked out. Every moment I valued my physical appearance, I was making myself vulnerable effectively to my own critique. If I noticed someone who was bigger than me, I'd either feel envious or hate, because presumably I thought they either didn't deserve it, or they had cheated with steroids, or just had got a better draw in the genetics lottery. Okay, thank you. Or some other negative emotion. Similarly, if there were attractive women, I'd feel disheartened if I didn't think they admired and desired my body. But this doesn't just apply to appearance. Even if I were to create a show not dissimilar to Rick and Morty, I'd most likely be doing it in the hope of receiving acclaim and respect from the masses, which too just makes me vulnerable as I'm relying on people or things which I do not control. I think this is why I have so much respect for Max PX, a Call of Duty player renowned for being the best quickscoper ever, yet who never uploaded his videos, which were of the highest quality, to the greater public. He did sometimes show them to his close friends, and having played with and spoken with him, I can vouch for his superior skill. But I respect him because I believe he would have been just as happy, although having spoken with him, he sounded mostly emotionless, and people speculated that he was somewhere on the autistic spectrum, just as happy doing what he did to an audience of one himself. I suppose this is what I should do. But I know myself too well to think that if I worked enough to create my first ever show or art of any form that I was proud of, or, well, invented something like a robot, and not immediately desire attention and praise for it, I would feel greatly disheartened if I didn't receive the level of respect and admiration I felt I deserved. Actually, you know what, I probably would be satisfied making a robot that only I knew about, if it was conscious and whatnot. But I don't think I'm smart enough to do that. But underpinning all of this, even if I could detach myself from the reliance on respect from others, I'd always need at least some amount of money, or at the very least food. Even if I ran away to the forest, I would have to hunt, scavenge, or farm. All things that I do not want to do. And if someone else valued the creation of an art or something enough to make doing these things they don't want to do worthwhile, then they should do it. I, however, do not. Also underpinning all of this is the fact that ultimately I don't respect the creation of something on par with Rick and Morty that much. I think really I'd need to create something on par with the inventions of Tesla or the discoveries of Einstein. Alas, I am neither. In fact, the only one I can conceive of that I think would suffice would be to create robotic consciousness or to simulate human consciousness. As a side note, I quite like the idea of releasing things anonymously, this time inspired of course by thousands of people like Banksy, etc., but mainly by another Call of Duty sniper, iReaps. Of course, if I were to pay attention to people's responses to the creation, I'd still just be doing all the things outlined above, and whilst I could avoid this by deliberately distancing myself from the response to whatever I created, again, I think I know myself too well to think I could avoid the temptation. Okay. People walking past, they are judging me because I'm talking to my phone. I think I know myself well enough to think I could avoid the temptation, and yet again I find myself reiterating notions that I believe to be a cornerstone of Buddhism. Oh god, this is kind of like a follow-on. However, I pride myself on my lack of desire to try to find other truths in the Buddhist religion. I hope that any ideas which would survive my own scrutiny will meet me through the same methods I use to find the ones already known to me. I think it's all too common for someone to notice similarities between beliefs that they have arrived at through their own deliberation and those of larger ideologies or group, and to then adopt the entire catalogues of that ideology as if they had arrived at them themselves. I believe I talked about the social justice warrior movement in this vein. Of course, I'm not saying I shouldn't read some of the Buddhist texts if I feel there may be some wisdom in there. Simply that just because I find some things in common with some of the ideas I find reasonable, and the ideas I believe to be most notably associated with the Buddha, that I should then look to the Buddha as the source of my next similarly meaningful ideas as a sort of shortcut to avoid doing my own reasoning. Now that was one sentence, and clearly I don't understand punctuation. For example, I make no assumptions about what the afterlife entails and how it affects the way I behave in the during life. The reason I hate post-mortem analyses of artists' work, like that of the nerd writer, is that they play their interpretation off as if they have understood hidden meanings that were intentionally placed there by the artist, and this could be just as convincingly done in a satirical manner. The death of Socrates, for one example. I could say, look at this brick, and notice how he chose not to place a cat or a glass of water in its place. He chose the brick, which is an object we all knowingly neglect on a daily basis, and yet the brick next to this brick has one small, slightly darker speck than all the others. This brick knows that it is not bound to being a brick. It could have chosen to be anything from a cat to a 10th dimension laser cluster, and yet it chose to accept its existence as a brick while simultaneously differentiating itself from all who preceded it. It knows it is a brick, and that it is a brick among bricks, but it is like no other, and so it is not a brick after all. It simply is. I'm not sure we can ever truly be satisfied with our partners to the point where we never feel some level of desire for another person. I think that the reason we desire a certain person in the first place is because they match, or rather have similarities with, a mental but mostly subliminal ideal fictional person that we have been developing throughout our lives, both as children and adults. Oh, great. Drawing inspiration from prominent figures we've met along the way that made us feel particular feelings. And this ideal is fluid, so each time we meet someone new who matches the ideal model in our minds, either aesthetically or characteristically, the model changes slightly, and the feeling we felt when meeting that person will now be felt upon meeting a new, entirely different person. I suppose it could be possible for the model to change in ways that only make you feel that very same initial feeling, only with the long-term partner. However, this is unlikely, but perhaps this is the goal. Thought inspired by observing Jake wanting one Pokemon t-shirt, then seeing another, and wanting that one more, then another, and wanting that one more. I believe the feeling he experienced each time was the same feeling, and so the process could go on ad infinitum. That was a pretty useless one, and I think the other two. I wrote this at 3 a.m. Invent, or rather come up with, and get someone else to make it a reality, a form of animation that allows me to create a show where the viewer can choose where to view from. Obviously have a recommended setting that gives traditional camera angles, but incorporate a kind of VR system. You know what, it's pretty much just a VR game with minimal to no player input. It may have some appeal to someone, but not enough to warrant its invention. What about robot actors? Crappy robot actors, or even crappy handmade models / puppets / mannequins on top of remote control cars to move around. Maybe I could do a different kind of animation each time, keep me on my toes, or maybe I could just kill myself. I'll admit this is the first time in a long time my brain has been able to have thoughts like these that almost suggest excitement. Whilst I'm all for letting people feel comfortable being who they are, provided this doesn't have a negative impact on the lives and well-being of others, I think telling people that there are no biological differences between men and women is an extremely dangerous thing. Perhaps I only speak for myself when I say this, but there are very few situations in which if I were to encounter a beautiful woman, I wouldn't be inclined to desire to get to know her. Whilst, and I'm not saying that I'm a beautiful man, but with regards to any man, there are far more situations, I'm led to believe, where the desire to find a sexual or emotional partner takes a backseat for a woman. If boys are taught there are no differences between the workings of their minds and that of the opposite sex, they'll find it difficult to understand why women don't respond in the way that they would if the roles were reversed. Okay, well, thank God that's over. Bye now.